Private Elias was in the thick of it, earth pulsing beneath him with each artillery impact. He was green, a certified rookie, and while he had seen smatterings of combat before, it was nothing like this. This was annihilation. It had been days since they had been able to get back to the command outpost, sleep in a cot instead of on the ground, and eat something warm that didn't come from a silver package. He wanted a chance at one of those pathetic hanging showers, lukewarm water, and scrubbing the dirt and grit from his scalp. But more than anything, he wanted to go home. Elias wasn't made for this. He was supposed to be a fisherman, like his father and his father's father. Water and salt and the roll of the sea were what he had been promised since he was a boy. Except he was drafted. It wasn't fair. Shipped out to join the United States 5th Army Regiment, it had been a relief to be placed on a scout team. They were a small group, and as such didn't garner much attention from Axis forces as they tramped through the desert, making notes of Axis outposts and installations and rarely seeing combat. Up until yesterday, he hadn't killed a man. But, well, yesterday wasn't his fault. He was just trying to survive. All the Axis soldiers had their faces covered by black balaclavas, and Elias tried to tell himself that they were some sort of monster while he took cover, popping out every few seconds to spray covering fire into the distance. He wasn't alone in this mess. Beside him, his friend, his most trusted compatriot, Geo, jammed another clip into his M1, yelling in manufactured bravery.
"Eat lead, Krauts!"
He and Giordano had known each other back home, ran in the same circles, and had been close acquaintances, if not friends. But something about war made even strangers like brothers in a matter of days. And now he couldn't imagine going through everything without him. They were the same age, and had similar demeanors. Passive boys turned into men capable of bloodshed. But where Elias just tried to grit his jaw and get through the fights, Geo seemed to become someone else. He wore a facade when the bullets started to fly, only going back to his normal personality once it was all over. Elias sort of admired that. It must have been easier to sleep at night when someone else was doing all the dirty work. Around them, the familiar rhythm of gunfire filtered through the commands of Sergeant Malone, bellowing,
"Incoming!"
as his weathered silhouette led their retreat. They were only 4 men, facing an entire Axis squadron. There was no shame in choosing to live another day, and that's exactly what they were doing. Retreat sounded shameful. Elias preferred surviving. He tries to keep sight of Malone and Cohen between the gaps in the twisted tank metal as he ran, Geo beside him. Still moving with earth-shaking slowness were 2 Panzer tanks, behemoths they did everything possible to avoid. Black holed outlines against the choking smoke of battle. Guttural German orders echoed around them, pressing and impossible to comprehend. Ahead, Malone disappeared behind a rocky outcropping, Cohen ducking in after him. Elias knew it was their only chance and skidded to a stop, grabbing Geo by the straps of his pack and yanking him along. Their boots slid through the dust, and Geo nearly collided with a rock. But together, they scrambled behind the stones, hands over their ears as the panzers boomed forward. The stone buckled and shattered from the explosions, sending sharp fragments into the air. And Elias threw his body over Geo, his friend making a pained sound at the impact. There was nothing they could do except huddle there, praying they wouldn't be buried beneath the boulders. The panzers moved on, and Elias let out the breath he had been holding. They had been pinned down for days. At first, it had just been a small group, probably an Axis scouting team. But apparently, they had backup close by that was able to come and flush the Americans out. Malone had this uncanny ability to keep them hidden, keep them alive. But Elias was afraid it was working against them now. The Germans clearly thought the 4 men were much more important than they were. And when a convoy was passing somewhere nearby, it was diverted to come and try to snuff them out. He didn't know how many more of these days he had left in him. Malone emerged from a crack between stones, Cohen right behind him. Both were smudged with dirt and grime and sweat, eyes ringed with gray from lack of sleep. Malone was quiet as he knelt beside the pair of friends, his expression unreadable.
You good?
He asked gruffly, gesturing to Elias. Elias didn't really know what he was asking, so he just nodded. Yeah, he was fine. Malone looked a little dubious but didn't press further. Instead, he settled down beside Cohen, resting his head back against the stone.
Well, we're stuck. Those bastards have the place surrounded. As soon as we go up for air, they're gonna put us in the ground. What can we do?
Gio sounded desperate. Elias didn't blame him. If he died out here, his mother would never know. She would wait for his letters to come in, and eventually, they would just stop, and he would be gone without a trace.
Cohen? Try and call out again.
Malone sighed, dragging a hand down his face. Cohen nodded once and began to fiddle with the wires of the radio. Elias listened to Cohen struggle to contact their regiment while Gio sat beside him, gaze fixed on the rocks. It was hard not to think about death when all he could hear was German. It was so different from the French he had been studying before the war. Elias had always liked languages. It was an escape, a way to dive into another culture and leave his own for a while. After a few minutes, Cohen threw his hands into the air and groaned a drawn-out, "Damn it!" failing to receive anything but static on the radio. Malone just shook his head, already resigned to their fate. Elias knew it had been a long shot. The Germans had been getting closer all day. It was only a matter of time until they found the little alcove the group had crawled into, and when they did, it would be over. He would be over. He had never done a great deal in his life, never written or contributed anything significant. Elias was a ghost, a nobody, an extra piece in a war that was so much bigger than he would ever be able to comprehend. It was a lot. Too much. But just as he felt himself start to panic, the sounds of battle behind them began to change. There was confusion in the German voices, and then a few beats of almost complete silence. Cohen, the only one of the 4 who spoke German, pressed his ear against the space in the rocks and pressed a finger to his lips, encouraging them to be quiet. Everyone was more than happy to oblige. The fighting had ceased for a moment, but if Elias listened close enough, he could hear the low voices that Cohen was trying to listen in on. The corporal's eyebrows shot up to his scalp as he listened, and then he pulled away, speaking low. "They're retreating."
Why the hell would they do that?
Malone snorted, but didn't contradict Cohen further. He was listening too. The 4 of them crammed into the small crack in the rocks while the Germans argued outside. Cohen continued to soak it all in, and then he added, his face going pale. "They said they've got to move, and quick. But the reason is twofold. Storm is coming, and whatever the storm brings scares the hell out of them." Storm? There was an edge of hope to Elias's voice. He imagined rain, tilting his sunburnt face to the sky.
The only kind they see out here regularly.
Malone confirmed, already standing to adjust his gear.
Sandstorms.
He swallowed hard and peeked through the rock above Cohen's head. Just like the corporal had said, the panzers were turning, the Axis soldiers flanking them, keeping pace as they fled the area. Elias's jaw went slack. Had they really retreated because of a sandstorm?
These guys have seen a hell of a thing,
Malone continued, watching the retreat with shrewd eyes.
They were scared shitless, and I'd like to know why.
Elias wanted to agree with him, but couldn't quite find the words. Something about a sandstorm didn't scare him half as much as the battle had. Sure, the wind could choke you, blow dirt into your eyes. But it was just a storm, just nature. It had to be better than a bullet to the back of the head.
Let's go,
Malone finally concluded. The sergeant didn't need to say it twice, and the four of them emerged from the rocky crevice, stretching their limbs and taking a deep breath of free air.
I've never been in a sandstorm before,
Gio commented as they set out on the trek back to base. Yeah, me either.
What was that?
Malone asked, turning to look over his shoulder to Elias. Nothing, sir.
Good.
Malone rolled his shoulders, preparing for the long walk.
We need to move. Whatever was scaring the Krauts isn't anything I want to run into.
Something wasn't right, which was an understatement. Nothing had been right for a long time. Not this damned war, the alien terrain of North Africa, or the never-ending stream of Axis soldiers that poured over his team like a tidal wave, again and again and again. They were faceless behind their helmets, silent. Strange enough, Elias could pretend they weren't human until they bled red on the surrounding sand. So, it was fitting when they finally found a brief respite from the firefight, that the sand itself became an enemy. When the line of enemy soldiers finally fell, it seemed like the earth itself took offense at the slaughter, and wrapped the small group of men in a stinging, gritty hell. And God was it hot. Elias thought he had never been hotter, or more miserable. The sand crawled into his uniform and past his slapdash face mask, a simple bandana wrapped around his mouth, prying itself into the most minuscule crevices with invisible, seeking fingers. He tasted it. Dust, dirt, the acrid smoke filtering over the horizon, and the brazen, metallic tinge of overheated guns. Elias also tasted blood. At first, imagined, but soon enough, his own. It cut into his gums, the sensitive flesh of his tongue and cheeks. He swallowed down copper and iron, coughing instantly as the grit made its way down his throat. Damn. They weren't going to make it long. Not in a storm like this. Still, they trudged on. What else was there to do? Lay down and die? Minutes bled into hours, and still the sandstorm raged. For most of the hellish march, Elias kept his eyes down on his boots, wanting to keep them out of the direct wind as much as possible. He could see the back of Cohen's legs, feet sinking into the dunes with each step, but it was enough to keep Elias in line. He hoped Gio was faring okay behind him. He didn't dare open his mouth to ask and check. Every few minutes, he'd look up and try to reorient himself with the world around him. Not that there was much to see. The air around him an almost solid pale brown. When he did it again, raising his eyes briefly, he saw something. At first, Elias was sure it was just some mirage, floating shadows in the distance, the sun behind them, outlining the writhing, man-like shapes. Elias narrowed his eyes and tried to look closer, but the shadows just twisted and turned. 1 second, the silhouettes of men on the horizon. The next moment, a dark, undulating mass. What is that? He breathed, but the storm was too loud. The second time he yelled it loud enough for the rest of the crew to hear. Do you see those things in the distance? What is that? Malone halted, followed by Cohen. Geo didn't crash into him from behind, so apparently he had gotten the message too.
What is what, Private?
The sergeant asked. Over there. Elias gestured with the muzzle of his gun. The 2 senior officers shielded their eyes and tried to see what Elias was seeing, but it was no use. Cohen shook his head, and Malone shrugged. I don't see anything, Cohen confirmed, his dust-streaked face squinting at the horizon.
Just keep moving,
Malone ordered. Yeah, but... Elias tried to protest but was cut short when the sergeant rounded on him.
Eyes forward, Private,
he barked.
That's an order.
Elias snapped his jaw shut, a bitter taste in his throat as the crew continued to march forward. He couldn't get the strange shadows out of his mind. They were constantly in the corner of his eye, flitting around and moving, sometimes dead ahead, sometimes off to the side. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed, hunted even. It came to a head when one came close enough to brush past him, and he felt it like a cold wind even through his uniform. Elias locked his jaw into place, raised his rifle, and fired out a series of shots. Sergeant Malone pushed the gun down and snapped.
Are you dull? You're doing nothing but giving away our positions, Private.
Abashed, Elias lowered his gun, shoulders coming up in a cringe. Yes, Sergeant. Sorry, Sergeant.
What the fuck are you aiming at anyway?
He could lie and just claim nerves. Or he could tell the truth and run the risk of the rest of his team looking at him like he had lost his mind. Maybe he had. There's something out there, Elias insisted. In the dust. Like I said before. I know you don't believe me, but... He stopped himself before he could say. And I think they're following us. Or worse, dead people. And bit the inside of his cheek. Malone looked back over his shoulder, squinting towards where Elias was gesturing. It was a tense moment where the sergeant's expression was unreadable, and Elias began to worry he had crossed a line. Then, Malone sighed, and muttered something about,
"The hell is coming out of this desert?"
Elias felt his stomach twist. He was going to ask the sergeant what he meant, but Cohen beat him to the punch. "What are you talking about, sir?" he asked. Malone waved him off and kept moving. Elias and Cohen exchanged a look, and then followed. The hope was that they were on the right path to make it back to the Allied encampment, where they could find refuge in the tents and sate their burning thirst. But they had been walking for so long, hours and hours even, without so much as a single landmark to tell them they were headed the right way. Geo sprinted for a second to catch up to Elias, breaking rank. Neither of the senior officers commented on it. When he spoke, he kept his voice low enough that only Elias could hear. "I saw them too. Don't worry." He whipped his head around to look at his friend. "Really? You did?" "Yep. Maybe we just see things they don't, you know?" Elias didn't want to question Malone, but he also didn't think he was wrong. What he saw had to have been real. "Yeah, maybe." "You've always had better eyes than me anyway," Geo continued, and Elias was grateful for the conversation. It made the trek just a little easier. "How would you know? You haven't needed glasses since we were kids." "We're the same age. And I mean, like, perception?" "Right," Elias snorted, his hands tightening on the grip of his gun. "Good eyesight isn't going to do us any good if we're dead." If we don't get back to camp soon, this wind is going to strip our skin to the bone. Cohen must have picked up just the tail end of the conversation, because he turned around, holding his forearm to his face against the blistering wind.
You're not wrong, kid. I say we find some place to ride out the storm and worry about getting back tomorrow.
Ahead of him, Malone held up his fist and gave the rest of the team a thumbs up. Geo slowed back down and took his place behind him once more, making the scouting team a single spear against the storm. It was a good idea, Elias had to admit. The storm showed no signs of letting up. If anything, the wind was stronger than ever, and the sand was so thick that visibility was practically nil. They needed to find whatever shelter they could get, and worry about getting back to camp when the storm was over. There was no way they were going to be able to navigate in a sandstorm. Even if they didn't lose their sense of direction, they would more than likely trip and break a leg and be stuck to die in the unforgiving desert heat. Elias would rather be crammed under some overhang and wait for the winds to die than attempt to finish their march. Otherwise, they were going to be lost to the dunes. With that grim realization, Elias and the others began scouring the ground around them. There must be some kind of rock formation, or a cave, something that could protect them from the elements. What they found was a figure, crumpled on the sand. Slinging the rifle onto his back, Malone ran to the fallen soldier and quickly discovered he was too late. Elias winced as the sergeant turned the corpse over, and he recognized the face. It was one of their own, one of the men that had gone missing weeks ago. Not from their small squadron, but of the larger regiment they were a part of. It was impossible to identify the cause of death. He was beaten and bloody, clothes in tatters, sunburnt and dehydrated. Elias thought perhaps he had died of exposure, but they all knew there was a distinct possibility that the enemy had done them in. As horrible as it was, the soldier was the first something they had seen in hours, the first tangible thing in the punishing winds. He hated it, but it gave him an inkling of hope, a promise that they weren't lost to time or reality in some sand-strewn purgatory. He tried to ask about the corpse, but the wind had picked up even more. It was so thick, the sand so stinging that it felt like fire where it could reach his flesh. No one dared open their mouths at that point. Finally, a towering shadow rose in front of them, tall and unmoving, unlike the shifting dunes. A cliff face, and as the four men got closer, they all saw what they were sure would be their salvation. The cave entrance was small, little more than a sliver of jet blackness against the buff-colored stone. But it was deep, dark, and most importantly, out of the damned sand. They were too desperate to care if Axe's troops were hiding in the cave, possibly waiting to pick them off one by one. With a collective breath, they plunged inside. The storm followed, pushing and shoving, but Elias and the other members of his team huddled together and let the darkness embrace them. The silence of the cave was so complete that Elias felt it pressing against his eardrums. The light from outside was filtered by the still raging storm, and he could hear Malone fidgeting with something before the artificial glow of his headlamp was flicked on.
Hold still,
the sergeant commanded.
Let me take stock of you lot.
They all obeyed, and their commander looked them over. There were 4 of them: himself, Private Elias, Private Giordano, Corporal Cohen, and of course Sergeant Malone. He took a quick count of their supplies: some ammo, a couple of canteens of water, a medkit, and a few cans of rations. It wasn't much. It would get them through a day or 2, depending on how long the storm lasted. One by one, They take their helmets off and brush the sand from their hair and their uniforms. Giordano starts coughing, hacking up a mouthful of sand. Cohen crosses his arms and paces the length of the cave, which isn't much, while Malone checks over the contents of his pack. In the sudden peace of it all, Elias notices a spot of red near his hip. Not his blood, but the blood of a combatant. It's fine, he tells himself. Nothing to worry about. We're tired and stressed and dehydrated. Just a bit of battlefield gore. No need to worry.
All right,
Malone finally speaks.
we can't go anywhere for a while. Best we can do is keep an eye on each other. Make sure everyone stays healthy. Check on each other every half hour.
Elias sits with his back against the wall, his helmet resting in his lap. Giordano is beside him, and Cohen takes up the corner opposite Elias and Gio. Malone is right. The cave is barely bigger than the opening, and not deep enough to separate the men very much. It's dark and cool, but not freezing. A sharp contrast to the baking sun and blinding wind outside. They eat a ration meal apiece, drink some water, and settle in. They were safe here, at least for the time being. Between bites, Elias felt himself relax for the first time in days. Inside, the howling of the storm is muffled, and Elias can hear his own breathing. He can hear the shuffle of Malone's uniform, the click of Cohen adjusting the radio on his belt, Gio's coughing. Man, I am so tired, I feel like I could pass out between blinks, Elias mutters, balling up his MRE pack in his hands. I hate this desert. At least back home there was rain.
Well, if you wanted rain, you should have joined the Navy,
Cohen quips.
Or the British Army.
Malone adds. Elias laughs. They sit back against the cold stone and do their best to settle in, sharing out a can of roasted peanuts between them and taking turns sipping from a single canteen. Gio has dozed off, so his friend pockets a handful of nuts to share with him later. The quiet isn't entirely uncomfortable, but there's still an edge to it. Gio keeps scratching his neck, and Malone drapes his forearm over his eyes, maybe trying to catch a few winks while the situation allows. After a while, Cohen breaks the silence.
So, we might as well use this time to rest, eh, Sergeant? Permission to speak freely?
The sergeant doesn't remove his arm, but gives Cohen a gruff,
Granted.
What the fuck happened out there?
Malone sighs, deep and long.
I don't know, Corporal. This could just be normal weather for the area. You can't tell me that any of you are familiar with North African weather.
We've been here for days, sir, Elias points out. That was a total anomaly. Have we recorded anything else like it since we've been here?
Well, in case you haven't noticed, Private, we've been a little busy. Weather reports weren't exactly high on my priority list.
Elias snaps his jaw shut, but not before shooting a glance at Cohen, hoping the corporal will come to his defense.
Private Elias raises a good point, sir,
Cohen says, his voice hesitant.
I can't say I've ever seen a storm like this before. Not out in the desert. And none of the guys that have been at camp longer than us have mentioned it either.
And, well, those things I saw out there, Elias ventures. I know you're going to say that I'm just dehydrated and seeing things, but...
That's enough.
Malone interrupts. He levels his stern gaze at Elias, then Cohen.
I said it once already. I don't know what the hell is going on, and I'd rather not speculate. For now, we ride out the storm, check in every 30 minutes, and rest.
All right, fine. Forget the weather then.
Cohen agrees.
But then what about the corpse? One of our own. What was he doing out there? And alone?
Elias doesn't have an answer for Cohen. Nobody does.
Maybe he wandered off,
Malone says.
Maybe he was injured. Maybe he lost his map. We'll never know, and there's no point in speculating. We'll grab his tags when the storm lets up and bring them back to camp, so his family can have some closure. That's all we can do.
We should stay here for the entire night, Cohen suggests, and Elias is inclined to agree. They were all exhausted, and there was no telling when the storm was going to stop. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had been out there in the storm, whatever he and Geo had seen, wasn't going to give up. Elias shivered and rubbed his palms on his thighs. The wind outside was a low whistle, echoing through the cave. Every so often, the sound changed pitch, morphing into something deeper and more guttural. No way we can make it back now, Elias agrees reluctantly. Not until the storm dies down. Malone grunts in response, but doesn't disagree. The sergeant looks deep in thought, staring at the ground while Elias's nerves continue to prickle. Something in the air had changed, like the cave had become too small, like it was getting colder, even though the sandstorm still raged outside.
What are you doing?
Malone demanded suddenly, making Elias jump. Cohen has his pack off and is fiddling with the radio on his hip. Just checking something, Cohen explains without looking up from his work.
You're not going to fix that thing out here. Try to sleep, Corporal.
I'm just making sure we don't lose contact with the base. Malone says nothing, but Elias can see a flicker of a smile cross his lips. It's gone in an instant.
Negative,
the sergeant replies.
I'm sure the storm is messing with the signal just as much as it's messing with us.
Cohen looks like he wants to argue, but closes his mouth, and Malone nods in satisfaction.
Get some rest. I'll take first watch,
the sergeant repeats, taking up position by the cave opening. Cohen shoots him a wary look, but the corporal eventually lies down on his side, curling into himself, and Elias is left alone with his thoughts in the low moaning of the wind. The wind continues to wail as the night drags on, but Elias doesn't get a wink of sleep. Every time he closes his eyes, he feels something there in the darkness. It presses in on him from all sides, cold and prickly, and Elias finds it harder and harder to breathe. He opens his eyes with a gasp, but it's like nothing has changed. The wind still howls outside, and the cave is pitch black, save for the dim headlamps that have been turned off to conserve power. Beside him, Geo is asleep, his face smooth and relaxed. Must be nice to be able to sleep through all of this. He hates the pang of envy he feels. Malone is keeping watch. His back is turned, but Elias can see his shadowed form hunched near the cave entrance, his helmet casting a soft glow over his shoulders and the stone floor. Across from him, Cohen is a lump, curled up and completely silent. He must be sleeping too. Elias would give anything to join them. Anything but stay here in the dark with the unseen things swirling around him, threatening to suffocate him. He maneuvers from where he is leaning against the wall until he's lying on the ground, pillowing his head on his pack. Against all odds, a bone-deep weariness starts to drag at him. Elias begins to drift, not quite asleep, but not fully awake either. Sleep hovers at the corners of his mind, and Elias feels himself falling into it when suddenly, Cohen speaks up. Sergeant? The corporal's voice is tense, and it jerks Elias from his stupor with a jolt. A sound echoes through the cave, and Elias hears Giordano inhale shakily. He understands his friend's reaction all too well. Primordial fear. The sound. It was unnameable, impossible to describe, deep and metallic, and and something that scared Elias down to his very DNA. Whatever was making the sound in the distance was coming from somewhere within the earth itself, and it was something completely unfamiliar to the soldiers. Malone stands, his movements silent and experienced, cutting a hand through the air to order his team to be quiet. Geo clamps a hand over his mouth, while Elias tries his damnedest to breathe through his nose and not suck in desperate, loud breaths. The sound comes again, metallic, grinding, like gears shifting in an engine. Cohen's eyes are wide, and Elias can see him trembling. What was that?
Shh.
Malone raises his gun. Another grinding noise, and another.
Maybe it's a generator.
Geo offers, desperate hope in his voice. A mine or something? Elias adds. They would need a generator, right?
No,
Malone whispers.
that's no generator. On your feet, soldiers. We have to check it out.
Elias grits his teeth. Sergeant, if you please, with all due respect, are you insane? Malone gives him a withering look.
It's either we go looking, or if it's a threat, it gets us while we're sleeping. I'll let the insubordination go this time, but don't test me.
Cohen stands, and Giordano is quick to follow, leaving Elias the only one sitting. He slowly rises. Malone flicks on his headlamp, the others following suit.
Stay close. Try not to make too much noise.
There's no way around it, so they walk. The darkness swallows the four men, their beams of light not quite penetrating the shadows. Elias can't shake the feeling that the walls are closing in, that he's hearing footsteps that aren't his team's. He turns his head slowly as they march, illuminating the cave, remembering when his pops took him on a tour of a similar one in the States, when he was 10, 11? Despite being thousands of miles and literal continents away, it all looked familiar. Funny how beneath the surface of the planet, all the differences seem to fade. The walls are wet, damp stone, humps of stalagmites rising up here and there in their path. Elias's flashlight catches a spider skittering away, and he jumps, making an awful little noise. Get it together, kid, Cohen hisses, and he swallows once, nodding. Yeah, sorry, he mutters. Didn't mean to.
Stow it.
Malone cuts in sharply.
Eyes front, mouths shut.
Yes, sir. Elias has never seen Malone like this. It's like the sergeant has shed 10 years off of his skin. Gone is the grizzled veteran that chews Elias out for not tying his boots tight enough or rolling his sleeves up inappropriately. Right now, Malone is focused and alert. There's a new tinge of panic in his voice, but he keeps it just under control, not letting it overwhelm him. It's somehow scarier than any battlefield screaming Elias has heard before. They keep going. There's still no sign of whatever it is making the odd noises. Elias looks back at the mouth of the cave, where it's swallowed by shadow. How far did they have to go? Turning his head towards the ceiling, his heart skips a beat. He nearly calls out, but instead bites his tongue, pointing. His sergeant follows the gesture and curses. Hanging above them are dozens of bats, watching them. They're silent and still. Not a single squeak amongst the colony. Elias knows that some bats are blind and that most hunt at night, but something about them feels wrong.
Keep moving,
Malone orders in a whisper, and they obey.
Don't make too much noise. Last thing we need is a swarm.
But Elias can barely hear him over the pounding of his ears. The feeling that the walls are closing in returns, stronger than ever. And on top of it all, the familiar shadows start to swirl, blooming at the corners of his eyes and taunting him with shapes and figures that dart away too quickly to be anything other than his imagination. The only thing that grounds him is Geo reaching out and gripping his shoulder for a too short beat of time. "It's gonna be okay," his friend whispers. "I won't let anything happen to you." Elias knows the words are a lie, but it's a lie he's willing to swallow for now. They continue walking, and the grinding, scraping noise is louder, closer. Elias can't figure out why it isn't panicking the bats. Maybe they've just grown used to it. "Any idea what it might be yet, Sergeant?" Cohen asks.
Not sure. Not a generator. Not a mining operation. It sounds big. Whatever it is.
Should we turn back? Wait for reinforcements?
No. I can still hear the storm. By the time it eases up, whatever is making that noise might have killed us already. Or disappeared. We need to be on the offensive.
Rifles hanging loose in their grasp, the group continues on. The place smells musty, like mold and damp soil, and Elias can't help but think that they're descending, walking further and further down. It's more and more of the same, and despite the occasional grinding echoes, Elias starts to fall into a trance-like state from the repetition of it all. The cave is cool, a blessed relief from the heat, and the dark is strangely comforting now. He can't wait to be back in a real bed, not the cots they're given at base. He can't wait to have his pops home cooking, a thick stew and fresh bread, a cold, frosty beer, and some dancing. Elias stops, noticing that Malone has halted. Cohen and Giordano nearly run into him. He watches as Malone raises his foot and taps his boot on the ground once, twice. The sound that reverberates from the tap isn't the dull thud of stone, but the tiny ring of metal. He repeats the motion, while the other three aim their headlamps down and illuminate the source of the sound. A vein of shimmering silver metallic material running through the stone floor, looking so natural that for a second, Elias can't pinpoint what is so off about it. It takes a moment for his mind to catch up. "Sergeant," he says slowly, carefully. "Is that?"
Steel.
Malone confirms, his voice a low hiss. Kneeling, he asks, "What the hell is this stuff doing here? Some kind of mineral deposit?" Cohen gives Elias an annoyed glare.
Are you stupid? It's steel, a composite, made by humans.
"You don't know that," Elias sputters.
Has to be man-made.
Malone points out.
Who else would have the means and resources to make something like this? This isn't a natural formation. But we don't have time to stop. Let's keep moving.
The steel vein changes as they move. It ebbs and flows like a river, wider at some points and shrinking down to almost nothing at others. Then it starts to branch out into glittering tributaries, climbing up the walls and onto the ceiling. At times, the veins all join together, and Elias swears that what he is looking at is a metal floor panel or wall, the shapes of rivets turning what was once natural into something manufactured. But then, 2 steps later, the panel would break apart into those tributaries once more, and the cave looked almost normal again. Almost. The cave begins to expand, the thin passages they had been walking through opening up slowly but surely. Cohen halts their march every few minutes, adjusting his radio to try to pick up any kind of signal to contact their regiment above ground. It never works, but Elias thinks the familiarity of the activity must bring him some comfort. Elias takes to studying the walls and the stone, looking for any sign that there were miners down here before. Stacked rocks, maybe. Some equipment. Eventually, something does catch his eye, but it isn't quite what he was looking for. Sarge. Malone turns, and Elias directs his flashlight to the wall. There are words. Elias can't read the script, but from the way Cohen's face pales, he's confident the corporal can.
Well?
Malone prompts, and Cohen shakes his head.
It's German. Different from what I'm used to, though. I don't know if I can make out all of it.
Try.
It's old, sir.
That wasn't a request, Corporal. It was an order. Figure it out.
Cohen nods.
Right, yeah.
He studies the wall.
It isn't the cleanest writing I've ever seen. Looks rushed. The characters are slightly different. So maybe this is a dialect of sorts?
Get to the point, Corporal.
Right, well, it reads...
Cohen pauses, and Elias watches his Adam's apple bob as he swallows.
They're waiting in the deep. They will return and consume us all.
Giordano huffs. What the fuck are we looking at here?
Well, what do you think, Cohen?
Malone steps forward and leans in to get a better look at the wall writing.
I want an explanation, and I'm not going to find it standing around.
Well, the walls are man-made.
Cohen taps them with the butt of his rifle, a hollow metallic thud sounding out in response.
That doesn't make any sense. Everything here is a contradiction.
Elias can hear the tightness in Cohen's voice, see how his hands tremble, and he thinks he knows what the other man is thinking. If they can't explain this, can't find a mundane, normal reason for all of this insanity, they're all fucked.
All right,
Malone says after a long pause.
Let's move out.
Cohen wavers for a second before straightening his shoulders and giving his sergeant a stiff nod. They continue onwards, the tunnels branching off more and more frequently.
I can't tell if this was a natural cave system or if this was all dug out,
Cohen says.
I don't even know if that's possible. It's massive in here.
The four men continue, and the passage opens up even more. Elias feels like he can almost see a wide cavern ahead, the beams of their flashlights barely cutting through the darkness. At this point, Elias doesn't understand why they continue to move, but it seems almost unconscious, like they couldn't stop even if they wanted to. Steel is almost everywhere now. It has overtaken the walls, the ceiling, the floor, the natural rock submerged beneath layers of human manufacturing, and only exploding out every 5 or so feet. Elias can't tell what is natural and what is artificial anymore, and at this point, he's not sure if the distinction matters.
Who built all this?
Cohen muses.
Axis forces? A covert American operation?
Doesn't matter? Elias asks.
I guess not.
I don't think it was made by anyone,
Malone says quietly. Cohen is unconvinced, his higher ranking allowing him more leeway with the sergeant.
That's absurd. You can't tell me you honestly believe that the steel just appeared out of nowhere.
No, not nowhere. But not from any source we understand either,
the sergeant clarifies.
I won't go so far as to say I've seen something like this before, but...
He trails off and stops, turning back to look at his men.
Whatever you see down here, don't panic. it will just make things far worse.
What the hell are you talking about, Sarge? Elias asks. Make what worse?
Sergeant,
Cohen says, his voice shaky.
Are you suggesting that the steel formed organically?
No, Corporal. It did not.
Then,
Listen, all of you. Keep your wits about you. Stay close, and if I tell you to run, you run. If I say shoot, you shoot. Got it?
There's silence, then a chorus of ready agreement. Without a warning, the radio that Cohen is carrying screeches, loudly enough that they all clap their hands over their ears. Cohen tries fiddling with the dial, his eyes wide.
what the hell did you do?
Elias demands.
I don't know. I didn't touch anything.
He tried to switch it off, but the feedback screeching only grew, morphing from a discordant mess into a sort of unfamiliar chittering that sent a shiver up Elias's spine.
Turn it off!
Malone barks.
I'm trying.
The chittering turns to a static crackle, a wave of white noise crashing over the group. Cohen frantically adjusts the antenna and the knobs, but the noise continues until, with an abrupt shriek, the sound cuts out, and the radio began to play music.
And drove the tyrant from the scene.
The radio sang to them. Is that? Elias began.
Gershwin,
Malone replied.
strike up the band.
Before the realization of what they were hearing settled into their minds, it stopped as soon as it started. But when the music cut out, Elias swore he could still hear the chittering, the voices of a million little creatures scraping across his mind like the legs of an insect. The noise left Elias with a dazed sort of fatigue, his mind trying desperately to block it out. It's getting to Cohen, too, making his brain spin.
How the hell?
The radio screeches once more.
Fuck!
Cohen growls in frustration, trying to fix it, as Malone shouts,
Forget the damn radio!
Cohen nods, not even really paying attention, still muttering in frustration. Elias watches Cohen curse to himself, half trying to fix his radio and half trying to understand, to figure out what is happening to them. His fingers keep twisting knobs and antenna, and he keeps tapping on the sides of the device. It doesn't make sense, Elias blurts out, feeling a rising wave of unease building inside. Nothing is making any fucking sense. The ground shakes and a distant echoing grind is heard again. Only, it feels so much louder this time, and Elias swears that from somewhere a fluorescent light flickers on and then dies instantly. But in that millisecond of light, he saw it. The shadow. Right there. Waiting for him. Geo and Elias's minds break first. The chaos of it all too much for them. The privates stagger out of the loose formation and swing their M1s wildly around the cave. Malone grabs Elias's arm.
Cut it out!
Elias tries to wrench his gun out of his grasp, but the sergeant has an iron grip. Let go! Let go of me!
Private, you need to stay calm.
Something is down here. I saw it.
Yeah,
Geo stammered, his eyes wide and glassy. The two privates were back to back with each other, their bond feeding into the panic.
It's crawling around, and I can hear it.
What the fuck are we dealing with? Axis forces? Soviets? What the hell did they build all this for? Elias's voice was high-pitched and tight, fighting to keep the rising dread he felt at bay. Cohen stepped forward, his hands raised in a calming gesture.
You have to calm down. We're gonna figure this out.
No! Elias was panting now. He saw something. He knew he did. Knew it in his bones. Knew it with every ounce of his soul. It was there, skittering around in the dark, just beyond their sight, waiting.
We can't just sit here. We have to kill it.
Malone lets go of Elias and nods to his corporal.
Do it.
Cohen was the tallest and broadest of the three of them, and when he lunged forward, Elias was too slow to catch on. Geo stumbled back against the cave wall, while Cohen managed to restrain Elias in a bear hug, lowering him slowly to the ground. The private struggled, his boots scraping against the floor.
I can hear it, Sarge. It's here. Can't you hear it? Why are you doing this? Geo, he can see it too.
What are you babbling about, kid?
Cohen grunted, tightening his grip.
Breathe,
Malone ordered, kneeling in front of him.
Don't focus on the noise. Look at me, Private.
Slowly, while Cohen had him braced on the cold ground, his wits came back to him. But Elias knew it was still there. A man, or something similar, crawling, creeping, an anomaly.
I can see it,
he rasped.
On the walls.
Cohen looks towards where Elias was staring and swallowed.
Sarge, I think he's right.
Malone's gaze followed, and he cursed. There, right where the light of their headlamps bled out, Elias's monsters. Their skin was a pale silver, their limbs thin and gangly. They had no hair. Their skulls were too large for their bodies. Their eyes were black, bulbous ovals, and their mouths little more than a lipless hole. Cohen still held Elias, but the private was too fixated on the creatures to notice. They were crawling towards them on all fours, their elbows bent unnaturally, their movements twitchy, like they were struggling to remember how to walk or function at all. Malone, despite the unholy, crawling monstrosities in front of them, was eerily calm.
Walk backward. Don't take your eyes off them. We want to make it back outside.
Shouldn't we shoot them? Geo asked. There's only a few of them. We could... I have plenty of ammo, Elias adds, but Malone cut his hand through the air.
Do not, under any circumstances, discharge your weapons unless I tell you.
The sergeant's tone leaves no room for argument. The men do as ordered, Elias nearly tripping over his own feet twice. The crawlers were quick, but not fast. Their limbs jerked and twitched, and their speed was an awkward, dragging creep. The cave itself seemed to have it out for Elias and the rest of the men too, and where he was sure they had gone straight earlier, the path branched off. After a tense few moments, Malone leads them down the left-hand path, the only person facing forward, while the other three keep their gazes locked on the oncoming enemy.
Sarge,
Cohen spoke up.
Why are we running? There's only a few.
Keep moving, Corporal.
But...
Enough.
Malone's voice was low and dangerous, and Elias got the feeling that any further questions would be met with hostility. So they keep moving. The cave starts to close in again, and the steel is so thick, Elias can barely tell where the walls and floor start and end. The creatures are lost somewhere behind a bend in the passageway, and Elias starts to hope that maybe, just maybe, they'll make it outside. Then, the floor starts to shift, the rocky terrain underfoot bleeding back to steel. Seconds pass, and the radio on Cohen's belt kicks on again, a grating symphony of classical music and insectoid, chittering voices. Behind it all, the screeching in the distance gets closer and closer and closer. There was no way out. The crawlers at their front, and the mysterious sound at their backs. They can hear the claws of the creatures on the steel and stone, the wet, miserable sounds falling from their mouths. Elias tries to keep his mind in the present, but he can't stop thinking about the unfathomable amount of earth pressing down on the cave from above, how far he was from home, and how a part of him wishes he would have joined the dozens of soldiers that had fallen in battle out in the desert sun. He didn't want to die without feeling the sun on his skin again, unfettered by sand and dirt and sweat. There wasn't time for melancholy. Not when they were being hunted, predator versus prey. Malone moves first. Elias doesn't understand what he does, but the sergeant pulls out something cylindrical that almost looks like a grenade. He throws it on the ground, and it explodes in a plume of choking smoke, filling the tunnels like a heavy curtain.
Run!
He yells, and the men do. Geo in the front with Malone, with the others close behind. The passageways twist and turn, the steel growing thicker. "Where the hell is the exit?" Elias demands.
Don't ask stupid questions!
Cohen snaps. They round the corner, and the passage is blocked by a mass of writhing, gray crawlers. Their spindly arms reaching out, their cavernous, splinter-filled mouth letting out a whining scream that had Cohen and Geo clapping their hands over their ears, and Elias firing his M1 blindly. He didn't even know why he pulled the trigger. It was an impossible, undeniable compulsion, and the crack, crack, crack of the bullets taking stone off the cave walls brought him a hysterical sort of joy. Malone grabs him and wrenches the weapon from his hands, shoving him down the opposite direction away from the crawlers.
Go! Move it!
Cohen is closest to the crawlers. The mass is closing in, their gawky arms grabbing at him, their jagged nails digging into his arms. Elias and Geo scream, but Cohen is eerily silent, terror stealing his voice. The only sound he makes is quick, little pants. Malone is the only one who keeps his head, and finally, he raises his rifle and fires into the thing holding his corporal. Blood splatters across Cohen's face, and the mottled gray crawler drops to the floor. The bullet making a wet, sickening sound as it tears through the creature's body. Malone doesn't give the remaining creatures time to react. He drags Cohen, the radio still screeching, and they run. But the tunnel they had chosen, the direction that was supposed to be their saving grace, became a dead end. Cohen was weak, staggering to a halt, his hands splaying across the rock and steel. "Shit! We can't die here," Elias says. "Not like this. Not to those things." Geo had gone quiet, and Elias's blood ran cold at the look in his friend's eyes. "Geo? What if..." the private began. He laughed. "What if this is the end? What if this was always where we were going? Into the maw of this thing?" Elias can barely keep up with what his friend is saying. "What are you talking about?"
Those creatures,
Geo continues.
maybe they've seen us before. Maybe they're studying us. And that's why this happened.
Elias shook his head. "You're crazy."
Am I? Elias, quit that jabbering.
Malone snaps.
We're gonna have to fight these things off.
Were none of them listening to Geo? Did they not understand the importance, the gravity of it all? Oh, now you want to shoot them? After Cohen is attacked? Not while we were all running for our damned?
Private Elias.
Malone's voice cuts through him like a blade.
If you don't shut your mouth and help us try and find a way out, so help me God, I will leave you here. Understand?
There is
No way out.
A voice spoke from behind them, high and hollow like it was imitating human speech without understanding any of the inflections or nuances there within. Elias whipped around. There, a few feet in front of him, stood another sort of creature. At first, while the white-hot shock of seeing the thing was still brand new, he thought it might be one of the crawlers that had been following them. There were definite similarities, but when the image started to permeate his mind, he saw the differences. This one was tall, towering even, at 7 foot, clothed in a long black robe and fully bipedal, just like a man. Its arms were thin, and its fingers were impossibly thin and jointed. It had no nose, no ears, and its eyes were 2 obsidian orbs sunken into its skull. The crawlers were nothing but animals, but this was something else, something intelligent. He could feel its stare, and the hair on his neck rose. The tension in the team was tangible, filled with raw terror. The panic, the utter and complete incomprehension of what they were looking at. It was so foreign that their brains couldn't parse through what they were seeing, and all they could do was stare. Elias opened his mouth, but he couldn't form words. The air stolen from his lungs. He wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go, trapped between a rock and a hard place.
You've done admirably, better than the other group of humans.
It said in that high, airy voice, the tone flat and expressionless.
We were unsure if you could adapt to the changing terrain.
Who are you?
Malone's voice cut in. Elias felt the sergeant step forward, his stance protective, his hands white-knuckled on his M1.
What do you want with us?
It tilted its huge head on its thin neck.
Want?
Why are you here? Why are you doing this?
The steel. Our apologies.
It replies.
The construct is still undergoing tests. Your world will become a part of it soon.
Cohen's chest was heaving.
What are you? You're not allowed to be here.
Cohen's question makes the creature pause.
Allowed. No. But our need far outweighs yours.
The sergeant tried to keep his tone even, grabbing Elias's arm in an iron grip when it looked like the private might fall.
Yeah? And what is it you need?
You.
It sang in that otherworldly tone.
The calcium in your bones. The iron in your blood. The cord of your sinew. You.
It reached out silver fingers tipped in black, curling in a slow, sweeping gesture towards Cohen.
You, chosen, are already bleeding. Come.
Malone stepped forward, his M1 raised.
Back away from him.
I will not harm you.
You will not touch him.
Malone snarled. Cohen was a shaking mess, his teeth clenched, his hands splayed across the cold cave wall. His blood was dripping onto the floor, his forearms torn open by the crawler's nails. Like a man hypnotized, he took one shaky step forward and met Malone's outstretched arm.
Step back.
Then hysterical, Geo added, "Cohen, run!" The corporal didn't get a chance to. As Malone tried to push Cohen behind him, the tall, stone-gray alien darted forward, its movements faster than the eye could track. It moved with a preternatural speed, its arachnoid hands wrapping around Cohen's neck and squeezing. The corporal choked, his M1 dropping from his hands, his fingers clawing at the thing's wrists.
No!
Geo, Malone, and Elias charged forward, but it cut them off, shoving Malone against the cave wall in a hit so hard that Elias heard his spine cracking. The alien, still holding Cohen, simply observed, head tilting to the side, its empty, black eyes locking with Elias.
Stop,
It ordered.
or he dies.
Malone choked, sclera going black as his eyes rolled back in his head. Elias skidded to a stop, futility grabbing at his arm. Sarge! Cohen was sinking against the cave wall, his struggles to escape the alien ceasing, the events of the night short-circuiting his brain. The radio on his belt kicked on again, blaring out a tiny symphony of Strike Up the Band. Darkness gathered, snuffing out their headlamps, and the last thing the three of them heard was Cohen's scream, thin and high and distorted, fading into static, and then silence. Their headlamps flickered back on, and when Elias's eyes adjusted, he spun in a frantic circle looking for the corporal. Cohen's radio, now abandoned, crooned. Cohen was gone. All that was left was his radio, halfway shattered on the steel stone floor, and 10 bloody streaks beneath them, like Cohen had tried to claw his way back to them, reaching for his men with the last atom of his strength. It wasn't enough.